My husband looked at my swollen stomach as if it were a liability, not a life. He handed me divorce papers to secure his future with his boss, convinced I was nothing but a helpless burden. He had no idea that 10 minutes earlier, a single phone call had changed everything. I had just inherited $20 billion. While he plotted to ruin me, he did not realize he was staring down the barrel of his own destruction. My name is Harper Whitmore, and at 33 years old, I had perfected the art of being invisible. I stood in the cramped kitchen of our third-floor walk-up in the Rowan district of Harbor City, pressing a hand against the small of my back to relieve the constant, dull ache that came with being 7 months pregnant. The apartment smelled faintly of old plumbing and the neighbor's burnt toast, a scent that had become the backdrop of my life. It was a far cry from the glass-walled penthouses of downtown, but it was what we could afford on my salary and Ethan's pride. My husband, Ethan Halston, was 34 and possessed a hunger that he tried very hard to disguise as integrity. He worked as a project manager at Halston Meridian Group, a construction and infrastructure giant owned by his estrangement-loving family. Ethan liked to tell our few friends that he was building his own path, that he despised the nepotism of the upper crust, but I watched him in the mornings, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, practicing a jawline clench that looked suspiciously like his father's. I was the safe choice, the boring choice. I worked as a data analyst at a boutique firm called Harborline Metrics. It was the kind of job that made people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties. When asked what I did, I would simply say I looked at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred. It was a masterpiece of mediocrity, a shield I had constructed to ensure I never outshined anyone, especially not the Halstons. To Ethan's parents, I was merely a traffic accident on their son's road to greatness. Gordon Halston, my father-in-law, spoke of legacy the way zealots spoke of salvation. His wife looked at me with the polite disdain one might reserve for a stain on a silk rug. I kept my head down. I bought maternity clothes from discount racks, clipped coupons for our weekly grocery runs, and never missed a prenatal appointment. I was the picture of stability. But lately, the air in our small apartment had shifted. The silence had grown teeth. Ethan was changing. It started with the phone calls. He would take them on the fire escape, shivering in the October chill, his voice dropping to a murmur whenever I walked past the window. His vocabulary was mutating too. The man who used to complain about football scores was now peppering our limited conversations with words like stability, alignment, and protecting the brand. It is just work stress. Harper, he had said last Tuesday when I asked why he was home 2 hours late. We need to ensure total alignment on this new project. Then there was Valerie Cross. She was the 42-year-old chief operating officer of Halston Meridian, a woman who wore power suits like armor and smiled like a shark sensing blood in the water. She had been Gordon's right hand for a decade, and there were rumors, always whispers, about her and Ethan from his early days as an intern. Lately, her name appeared on his phone screen more often than mine. The breaking point of my denial arrived in the form of a heavy, cream-colored envelope that was slid under our door this morning. It was an invitation to a weekend gala at the family estate in Ridgehaven. The calligraphy was sharp, aggressive. It did not read like a request for our company. It read like a summons to court. I sat at our scratched dining table, the invitation resting near my swollen belly. Ethan walked in, tossing his keys into the bowl with a clatter that made me flinch. He saw the envelope and froze. He did not smile. He did not ask how I was feeling or if the baby had kicked. Instead, his eyes drifted down to my stomach. It was a fleeting look, gone in a second, but I caught it. It was not the look of a father seeing his future child. It was the look of a project manager assessing a liability that threatened to go over budget. "We have to go," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Valerie says it is crucial for the next quarter." I nodded slowly, my hand instinctively covering my child. Of course, Ethan. We would not want to be out of alignment. He turned away to pour himself a drink, missing the way my hands were trembling. He thought I was just the quiet, pregnant wife who analyzed boring data. He had no idea that I was analyzing him, and for the first time, the data was terrifying. The vibration of my phone against the cheap laminate of my desk at Harborline Metrics felt ordinary, but the voice on the other end was anything but. It was a crisp, polished baritone that sounded like it cost $500 an hour just to listen to. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Arthur Sterling from Brackett and Sloan, the voice said. I am contacting you regarding the execution of the Whitmore Atlas estate. We need you to come to our private offices immediately, alone. I frowned, rubbing a cramp in my side. I think you have the wrong number. My bank account currently has about $1,200 in it. I do not have an estate. You do now, Sterling replied, his tone dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a shout. Your grandmother, Matilda Whitmore, passed away yesterday morning. You are the sole beneficiary. The current valuation of the assets under trust is approximately $20 billion. The air left the room. $20 billion. It was a number so large it felt abstract, like the distance to the sun. Matilda Whitmore was a ghost in my life, a financial titan who had supposedly cut my mother off decades ago for marrying a mechanic. I had never met her, yet she had just dropped the weight of the world into my lap. There are conditions, Sterling continued, sensing my silence. You must sign the transfer of voting rights and control keys in person. Until then, absolute secrecy is paramount. If news leaks before the transfer is finalized, the markets will destabilize and the vultures will circle. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. My first instinct was to call Ethan. I wanted to tell him that we were free, that he could quit the job that was eating his soul, that we could buy a house where the nursery didn't smell like mildew. But as I stared at his contact photo, a smiling picture from 3 years ago that looked nothing like the man living in my house today, I stopped. If I told him, would he hug me, or would his eyes light up with the same calculation he used for his construction projects? I realized with a sickening jolt that I needed to know if he loved Harper, the wife, or if he would love Harper, the billionaire. So, I swallowed the secret. I buried $20 billion under my ribcage, right next to the kicking of our daughter. Later that afternoon, while I was sitting in the waiting room of the law firm, Sterling slid a tablet across the mahogany table. We received this 10 minutes ago, he said grimly. It was sent to a secure internal server that only 3 people have access to. The screen displayed a single email. The text stark and black against the white background, do not go to Ridgehaven. If you go, everything of yours will blow. My blood ran cold. Ridgehaven was where the Halston Gala was being held this weekend. Someone knows, I whispered, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. Someone knows about the inheritance. Someone is watching the transition, Sterling corrected. And they know your social calendar. He then opened a thick portfolio labeled Indirect Asset Control. Part of the estate involves governance intervention rights in several major sectors. Sterling explained, your grandmother liked to keep her hands on the wheel, even from the shadows. Take a look at the infrastructure holdings. I scanned the list, my eyes widening as they landed on a familiar name nested 3 layers deep under a holding company. Halston Meridian Group. My breath hitched. I own them. You hold the controlling interest in their parent debt and voting shares, Sterling said. Technically, Mrs. Whitmore, you are about to become your husband's ultimate boss. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into streaks of red and gold. I parked the car and sat there for 20 minutes, composing my face. I had to become an actress. I had to split myself in 2. There would be Harper, the tired, pregnant wife who worried about the price of diapers, and then there would be the other Harper, the silent owner of an empire, working with a shadow legal team to find out who was threatening me. I walked into the apartment. Ethan was on the couch, typing furiously on his laptop. He didn't look up. You are late, he muttered. Valerie needs those reports filed by 8 o'clock in the morning. Did you pick up the dry cleaning for the trip? I looked at the back of his head, at the man who thought he was dismissing a nobody. I got it, I said softly. I wouldn't want you to look bad at Ridgehaven. He had no clue. If they were hunting for a power player, a tycoon capable of toppling their little kingdom, they would never look twice at the pregnant woman waddling into the kitchen to make tea. Let them underestimate me. That was my greatest weapon. The iron gates of Ridgehaven did not open with a welcoming creak. They slid back with the silent, hydraulic hiss of a prison lockdown. As Ethan drove our sedan up the winding gravel path, I noticed the security detail had changed. The usual elderly gatekeeper was gone, replaced by men in dark tactical vests who looked more like mercenaries than staff. Before we were even allowed to park, a clipboard was thrust through my window. Standard procedure. Ma'am, the guard said, though his eyes remained hidden behind sunglasses. We require consent for audio and video monitoring on the premises tonight. For liability purposes. I hesitated, the pen hovering over the paper. This was not a family dinner. This was a setup. I looked at Ethan, but he was staring straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I signed. I had to play the part of the obedient, clueless wife a little longer. Inside, the air was conditioned to a temperature that felt designed to preserve dead things. Gordon Halston stood in the foyer, a scotch in hand, watching us enter. He did not smile. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my pregnancy bump, not with affection, but with the cold calculation of an actuary assessing a depreciating asset. You are late, Gordon said, turning his back before we fully crossed the threshold. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, drifted toward me like a poisonous fog. She touched the fabric of my maternity dress, a polyester blend I had bought on sale, with the tips of her fingers. Oh, Harper, she sighed, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. You always manage to look so simple. It is quite a talent to be so unburdened by taste. I prioritize comfort. Eleanor, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Comfort is for the weak. Dear, she whispered, patting my cheek. We moved to the drawing room, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Valerie Cross was already there, sitting in the high-backed leather armchair that usually belonged to the head of the house. She held a crystal tumbler and looked at ease, as if she were the one inheriting this legacy. Not Ethan. Hello, E, Valerie said, using a nickname I had never heard anyone use but his college friends. She didn't stand up. You look tired. Is the domestic life wearing you down? Ethan exhaled, his shoulders dropping in a way they never did around me. Just a long week. Val. Good to see you. Dinner was a masterclass in humiliation. The silverware was heavy silver, the porcelain thin as eggshells, and the conversation sharpened to draw blood. They didn't ask about the baby. Instead, Gordon launched into an interrogation disguised as small talk. How is that little data job of yours? Harper Gordon asked, slicing his steak with surgical precision. What is your annual projection? 40,050. It pays the bills, I said quietly. Does it? Valerie interjected, her eyes gleaming over the rim of her wine glass. Because in this economy, 40,000 is barely a rounding error. Ethan is building an empire here. We have to consider the reputational risk of his attachments. Attachments, I repeated, feigning confusion. Ethan hates secrets, Valerie said, leaning forward. He needs clarity. You don't have any secrets, do you? Harper. You are just an open, empty book. She looked at me as if I were a blank page, utterly insignificant. I forced myself to swallow a bite of dry chicken. If only she knew. Gordon cleared his throat and raised his glass. To family, he announced. The word sounded like a threat. And remember the golden rule of this house. If you are not at the table, you are on the menu. As if on cue, a server materialized and placed a thick, heavy envelope directly in front of me. There was no envelope for Ethan. There was no envelope for Valerie. The table went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Ethan, silently begging him to say something, to ask what this was. He refused to meet my eyes. Instead, he looked at Valerie and gave a short, sharp nod. It was the nod of a man who had already made the deal. He had sold me out before we even ordered appetizers. "Open it," Gordon commanded. I slid a trembling finger under the flap and pulled out a stack of legal documents. I scanned the first page, and the bile rose in my throat. It was titled Spousal Role Definition and Non-Disclosure Agreement. As I turned the pages, the legalese stripped me bare. It outlined an honorary position for me within the family trust, a title with zero power. It demanded a full waiver of any future claims to Halston assets. It explicitly forbade me from interfering, owning, or voting on any shares related to the company. And most damning of all, it required my silence on all family matters in exchange for a pitiful monthly allowance. It was a document designed to turn a wife into a paid employee, and a powerless one at that. They were trying to sterilize me legally. I don't understand, I stammered, looking at Ethan. "You want me to sign away my voice." Ethan finally looked at me, his eyes dead. "Just sign it. Harper, do not make this difficult." I looked down at the paper, at the line waiting for my signature. They thought they were taking everything from me. They had no idea they were handing a loaded gun to the owner of their debt. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a sudden, freezing clarity that seemed to drop the room temperature to 0. I held the paper up, the edges crinkling in my grip. Ethan stared at the untouched rim of his wine glass, refusing to meet my gaze. "Harper, please, just sign it, so we can have some peace. We need this." "We," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "There is no we in this document. Ethan, there is only me giving up everything and you getting everything." "Let us be practical," Gordon interrupted, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "The North Bridge project is currently $3 million over budget. Ethan needs a capital injection to save his reputation. I am willing to authorize the transfer of $5 million to his division tomorrow morning. But I require insurance. I need a guarantee that his domestic liabilities will not become corporate headaches." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, for the first time that evening. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not his partner. I was not the mother of his child. I was a transaction fee. I was the currency he was using to buy his father's approval. "And if I refuse?" I asked, turning to Gordon. Gordon smiled, a thin stretching of lips that did not reach his eyes. "Then Ethan returns to his cubicle in the basement levels. And you, my dear, will be navigating impending motherhood without the Halston safety net. Do you know how expensive a complicated delivery is without our premium insurance coverage? I imagine a data analyst's salary does not cover unforeseen tragedies." It was a threat wrapped in concern, polite and absolutely filthy. Valerie leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She looked at me with a predatory boredom. "Don't be difficult, Harper. We have done our due diligence. We have a file on everyone who enters this family. It would be a shame if an internal audit at your firm found evidence of data theft. We could make you look very unstable. Very quickly." She was threatening to frame me. She was threatening to destroy my small, mediocre career just to ensure I stayed silent. But in her arrogance, she had tipped her hand. Why were they so aggressive? Why did they need me bound and gagged so tightly right now? I took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch. My mind flashed back to the portfolio Arthur Sterling had shown me, the indirect asset control list. There had been a footnote about legal reserves. Speaking of audits, I said, keeping my voice deceptively light. How is that class action labor lawsuit regarding the undocumented workers at the shipyard going? I recall seeing a statistical anomaly in the sector report suggesting the subpoena list is quite extensive. The reaction was instantaneous. Valerie flinched, her wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Gordon's eyes narrowed into slits, his knuckles gripping the table edge. For a split second, the mask of invincibility slipped, revealing pure, unadulterated panic. I had guessed right. They were not just trying to silence a nagging wife. They were terrified. They were sitting on a powder keg of illegal activity, and they were afraid that anyone outside their inner circle might strike a match. I stood up, the chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. I am not signing this tonight. Sit down, Gordon commanded, his voice losing its polish. No, I said. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I made it to the front porch, the cold night air hitting my flushed face. When I heard heavy footsteps behind me, it was Ethan. For a second, a foolish, hopeful part of me thought he was coming to defend me, thought he was coming to tell me he chose us. Harper, stop, he hissed, grabbing my arm. You can't just walk away from Gordon. Go back inside. Let Valerie fix this. She can rewrite the terms if you just apologize. Tell them you were hormonal. I stared at him. He didn't want to leave with me. He wanted to drag me back in and force me to kneel so his boss could pat him on the head. Let go of my arm, I said quietly. He released me, looking frustrated, like a child denied a toy. You are being selfish. I am doing this for our future. You are doing this for your future, I corrected. And I am not part of it. I got into our old sedan, locking the doors before he could try to stop me again. As I backed out of the driveway, leaving him standing there under the grand portico of his parents' house, I realized something profound. I used to think abandonment was the act of packing a bag and walking out the door. I was wrong. Abandonment is not leaving. Abandonment is staying, but standing on the other side of the line. Ethan hadn't left me. He had just watched me drown and asked if I could do it more quietly. I drove down the winding road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting protectively on my belly. They thought they had broken me. They didn't know I was driving away with $20 billion and a newfound will to burn their house to the ground. The text message from Ethan arrived at 3 a.m. It was short, cowardly, and illuminated the dark bedroom where I lay awake. I need time. Staying at a hotel? Don't call. He did not come home. By the time the sun bled through the blinds, an automated notification from our joint bank account pinged my tablet. It was a charge for a security deposit at the Sovereign, a luxury high-rise downtown. I knew that building. Valerie lived in the penthouse. My husband hadn't just left. He had moved into the fortress of the enemy. In my exhaustion, I made a mistake that turned into a revelation. On the kitchen counter, next to my burner phone for the lawyers, lay Ethan's work phone. He must have left it behind in his haste to chase after Gordon's approval the night before. They were identical black models. I picked it up, intending to call Arthur Sterling, but the screen unlocked with a simple swipe. He had disabled the passcode. A message was waiting in his notifications. It was from an unsaved number. Hand her over, or lose everything. I frowned, my thumb hovering over the glass. Below the text was an image attachment. I opened it. It was a scanned police report from 2 years ago, detailed with grainy photos of a burnt-out design studio the failed venture Ethan had claimed was destroyed by faulty wiring. But the report had a highlighted section evidence of accelerant found. Arson suspected. My stomach dropped. The fire wasn't an accident. It was insurance fraud. I drove to the hotel listed on the credit card charge, barging past the concierge. I found Ethan in the lobby bar, staring into a coffee cup as if it held the cure for cowardice. When he saw me, he didn't look angry. He looked relieved, like a child waiting to be scolded so he could stop hiding. I slammed the phone onto the table, the screen displaying the arson report. "You burned down your studio," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And Gordon knows." Ethan flinched, pulling the phone into his lap. It was a mistake. "Harper, we were underwater. I was going to lose everything. Dad said he could make it go away. He paid off the inspector. He scrubbed the record. And now he owns you," I whispered. "Valerie has the original files," Ethan admitted, his voice cracking. "She keeps them in a safe. If I don't get you to sign that NDA, she releases the report. I go to prison. Harper, do you want the father of your child in prison? So you trade me to save yourself?" I said. He rubbed his face, looking pathetic and small. "It is not just that. Valerie. She helped me. She told me to watch you. She said you were acting suspicious. The late nights, the secret calls." I froze. "What are you talking about? I thought you were cheating on me." Ethan blurted out, tears welling in his eyes. "I was so scared you were seeing someone else. So I told Valerie everything. I gave her your schedule. I told her about your doctor appointments. I forwarded her your call logs. I wanted her to find out who the guy was." The room spun. The stalker wasn't a sophisticated spy. It was my husband's paranoia weaponized by a predator. I wasn't being tracked by a satellite. I was being tracked by the man who shared my bed. He had handed Valerie the map to my life because he couldn't conceive that I might have a secret that wasn't an affair. "You idiot," I said. The words hollow. I was not cheating. I was trying to save money for a nursery. Ethan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the table. "I filed this morning," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It is better this way. Gordon says if we separate legally, your refusal to sign the NDA won't reflect on me as much. It creates distance." I opened the packet. It was a petition for divorce, but it was worse than a split. It was a preemptive strike. He was asking for an emergency injunction to seal our financial records and a non-disparagement clause that would fine me $50,000 if I spoke publicly about the Halston family. He was suing me for silence while I carried his child. My actual phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Valerie. "Sign the NDA. Harper. I will ensure Ethan has a future at the company. And I will personally guarantee your health insurance covers the delivery. Don't be a martyr. Babies are expensive." I looked at Ethan, who was weeping silently now, a man broken by his own greed and fear. He wasn't the villain of the story. He was just the weakling who opened the gate for them. "You think you are saving yourself," I said, standing up, "but you just cut the only lifeline you had. Harper, please," he stammered, reaching for my hand. "I am doing this for us. For the baby." I pulled my hand back as if he were burning. "Do not talk about my baby. You just tried to bargain with her health care." I walked out of the hotel lobby, leaving him with his coffee and his shame. I did not cry. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought they could bury me under legal paper. They thought they could starve me out. They didn't know that I had $20 billion and an army of forensic accountants waiting for my signal. I wasn't going to fight them with emotion. I was going to fight them with a paper trail so long it would wrap around their necks and choke the life out of their legacy. The ink was barely dry on the heavy parchment when Arthur Sterling capped his pen with a satisfying click. We were in the deepest vault of Brackett and Sloan, a room that smelled of old money and silence. With a single signature, I had formally accepted the Whitmore Atlas estate. I was now the invisible hand guiding $20 billion of capital. But to the world, I was still just a discarded wife living in a motel. "The asset management team is active," Sterling said, sliding a black folder across the table. "Your voting rights are secured. We have proxy access to the Halston Meridian parent debt. We can pull the rug whenever you say the word. Not yet," I said, my voice steady. I don't just want to pull the rug. I want to make sure they have nowhere to land. I didn't stop at the lawyers. I authorized the hiring of Greymantle Forensics, a private intelligence firm that specialized in corporate autopsies. Their lead investigator, a woman named Cole who spoke in short, clipped sentences, took the assignment with a grim nod. I wanted to know exactly how Gordon and Valerie operated. I wanted the dirt they thought they had buried, but first, I needed to prove exactly how they were watching me. I opened the shared family calendar app on my phone, the one Ethan had synced with his work account, and logged a fake appointment, Dr. Eris, high-risk consultation, 10 o'clock. Wednesday. I didn't tell a soul. If anyone showed up, it meant they were actively monitoring Ethan's digital footprint to stalk me. Wednesday morning. I sat in the waiting room of the clinic, flipping through a parenting magazine I wasn't reading. At 10:15, the automatic doors slid open. The smell of expensive perfume hit me before I even saw her. Valerie Cross walked in, looking ridiculously out of place in her sharp, tailored suit among the anxious mothers in sweatpants. She wasn't there for a checkup. She scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and marched over. "You are hard to track down, Harper," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. I tapped the record button on my phone, concealed beneath my purse. I didn't realize the COO of a construction giant had time to accompany ex-wives to prenatal exams. "I am here to offer you a lifeline," Valerie hissed, sitting down next to me. "Gordon is losing patience. If you sign the updated NDA today, we will double the monthly stipend, $10,000 a month. Tax-free. That is more money than you have ever seen. And if I don't," I asked, leaning back, "then we release the narrative that you are mentally unfit," she said, smoothing her skirt. "Postpartum depression before the baby is even born. We have the doctors lined up to testify. You will lose custody. Harper, do not fight a war you cannot afford. Is that a threat?" "Valerie, it is a business strategy," she smiled thinly. "Just give us the signature, and you get to keep the baby. It is a fair trade." She left 5 minutes later, confident she had rattled me. She had no idea she had just handed me a recording of clear extortion. That evening, Cole from Greymantle called. Her voice was buzzing with adrenaline. "Mrs. Whitmore, you were right to look at the offshore accounts," Cole said. "We found a consulting firm in the Caymans called Apex Solutions. Halston Meridian pays them a retainer of $200,000 a month for advisory services. But Apex doesn't have consultants. It has government officials. They are bribing city planners for infrastructure permits. Who signs the checks, I asked?" "Valerie Cross signs them," Cole replied. "But the directives come from an encrypted email address linked to Gordon Halston." I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. This wasn't just leverage. This was federal prison time. "Do we leak it to the press?" Sterling asked when I forwarded him the findings. "No," I said, looking at the city skyline from my cheap motel window. "If we leak it, they spin it. They find a scapegoat. I need to drop this bomb where they can't run. I am going to the board meeting." "Gordon is already spinning a story," Sterling warned. "He is telling the board members that you are a corporate spy. He claims you married Ethan to infiltrate the company and steal trade secrets. He is going to try to bar you from the building." I smiled, and it was the first time in weeks I felt genuinely dangerous. Let him try. He thinks he is locking out a spy. He doesn't know he is locking out the majority shareholder. I opened my laptop and composed a single email to Ethan. I didn't ask why or how, or plead for him to come back. I simply wrote, "From this moment forward, all communication goes through my legal team. Do not contact me personally again." I hit send. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. For the first time, he was realizing that silence wasn't something he could buy from me. It was something I was using to bury him. The smear campaign began with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. By 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 local gossip blogs and a Business Insider column were running variations of the same headline. Social climber or corporate spy, the scandal-rocking Halston Meridian. They painted a picture of me as a desperate, low-level analyst who had seduced the heir of a construction empire to steal trade secrets. They called me a gold digger. They called me a fraud. But Gordon and Valerie did not stop at headlines. By noon, Arthur Sterling called to inform me that Valerie had filed for an emergency injunction. She was petitioning the court to block me from accessing any assets derived from or related to the Halston Union, citing pending investigations into data theft. The knife in my back, however, was the affidavit attached to the filing. It was signed by Ethan. In it, he claimed he had witnessed me using unauthorized communication devices and acting with secretive intent regarding his business files. He had taken the moment I used the burner phone to call my lawyers and twisted it into evidence of corporate espionage. He was not just divorcing me, he was testifying against me to save his own skin. The violence of their strategy hit me an hour later at the pharmacy. I was trying to pick up my prenatal vitamins and a prescription for my blood pressure, which had spiked dangerously high. When I swiped our joint debit card, the machine beeped a harsh, rejecting tone. "I am sorry. Mrs. Halston," the pharmacist said, looking at her screen with pity. "The card is declined, and it looks like your insurance coverage has been terminated effective midnight last night." I stood there, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. They had cut me off. They knew I was 7 months pregnant, and they had stripped away my financial lifeline and my medical access. It was a sterile, systemic kind of violence, committed with keystrokes instead of fists, but it was meant to bleed me out just the same. I paid for the medicine with the last $300 of cash in my wallet and walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. That evening, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Cole at Greymantle. "We got them," she wrote. "We breached the internal logs. We have digital footprints proving Valerie accessed the HR files of your firm illegally. She also pulled credit reports on your parents and authorized a private investigator to tail your sister. It is all time-stamped." Before I could process the victory, another message arrived from an unknown number. It was a woman named Sarah, a former legal assistant who had been fired by Valerie 6 months prior. "I saw the news," Sarah wrote. "I know what they are trying to make you sign. I have the draft of the real NDA. It is not just about silence. Look at Clause 14B. She attached a photo of a document. Clause 14B stated that if the spouse was found to have caused reputational harm to the Halston brand, they would be deemed in breach of the morality clause, automatically forfeiting primary custody rights to any offspring in favor of the Halston estate. I went cold. It wasn't just about money. They wanted to take my baby. They wanted to paint me as unstable and poor, so they could swoop in as the wealthy saviors and take my child to raise as an heir to their corrupt legacy. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage. I called Arthur Sterling. "Send it," I commanded. "Send the notice of beneficial ownership to the board of directors. Do not reveal the $20 billion figure yet. Just inform them that Harper Whitmore legally holds the controlling voting interest in the trust that owns their debt. Let them wonder how big the monster is." 30 minutes after the email was sent, my personal phone rang. It was a blocked number. I knew who it was. I answered, saying nothing. "Who do you think you are?" Gordon's voice came through, low and trembling with a fury I had never heard before. "You think a piece of paper scares me, I will bury you in litigation for 20 years. You will never see that child. You will never work in this town again. I am not the girl Ethan brought home to dinner anymore." "Gordon," I replied, my voice steady as steel. "You are nothing," he spat. "You are a rounding error." "No," I said, looking at the city lights that I now effectively owned. "I am the person who is about to end this game." I hung up and turned off the phone. The time for talking was over. Tomorrow. I would walk into the lion's den, and I wasn't bringing a whip. I was bringing the deed to the zoo. The summons for the emergency board meeting went out at midnight. A digital flare shot into the darkness of the city. My legal team intercepted the notification within minutes. Gordon Halston had scheduled a session for 7 o'clock in the morning at the Halston Meridian headquarters. The agenda was a single line of panicked aggression, ratification of measure to strip voting rights from fraudulent claimants. He was trying to cut my throat before the market opened. But the real revelation came from the files Sarah, the former legal assistant, had sent over. I sat on the edge of my motel bed, scrolling through old emails between Valerie and Gordon from a decade ago. It wasn't just corporate ambition that drove Valerie Cross. It was a scorned vendetta. 10 years ago, she had proposed a strategic merger of her own assets with the Halston family through a marriage to Ethan. She had groomed him, positioned herself to be his wife and the future CEO. Gordon had shut it down, calling her too new money to carry the Halston name. She wasn't helping Ethan because she cared about him. She was helping him because she intended to use him as a puppet, take the CEO chair that Gordon had denied her, and finally rule the empire she had been rejected from. She needed a common enemy to force the board to back her play, and I was the perfect villain. My phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Ethan. I answered, placing the phone on the nightstand and hitting the record button on my laptop. Harper. He sounded breathless, like he had been running. Please. I talked to Dad. If you just sign a modified agreement, we can drop the morality clause. We can give you custody. Just sign the financial waiver. Why are you so terrified? Ethan, I asked, my voice calm in the quiet room. It is not just about the money. Is it? You don't understand, he stammered, his voice cracking with a hysteria I had never heard before. If this goes to court, everything comes out. The studio. The fire. Valerie said she would release the proof if I don't fix this. I leaned in closer to the microphone. The fire at your design studio. You need to say it. Ethan. Was it an accident? No, he cried out. No, it was staged. Okay, are you happy? Dad set it up to claim the insurance money to cover my debts. He hired the guy. Valerie kept the payment records to hold over us. If she leaks that, I go to jail for arson and fraud. I can't go to jail. Harper. I stopped the recording. There it was, the smoking gun. He had just admitted to a felony and implicated both the CEO and the COO in a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and blackmail. I am sorry. Ethan, I said softly, but you should have thought about that before you tried to sell your wife to save your reputation. I hung up. By 6 o'clock, Arthur Sterling had prepared 2 envelopes. The first contained a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and demanding full custody based on the criminal instability of the father. The second envelope was for the board of directors. It contained the forensic logs of Valerie's illegal surveillance, the evidence of the bribery scheme in the Caymans, and the transcript of Ethan's confession. I dressed slowly. I did not put on a power suit. I did not try to look like a man. I wore a simple, tailored navy dress that skimmed over my pregnancy bump. I pulled my hair back into a low bun. I wanted to look exactly like who I was, a woman about to become a mother who had no time for their games. I wanted them to see the mediocre wife one last time before I showed them the Titan. As I checked my reflection, my phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. You do not dare walk into that room. I stared at the screen. They were still trying to rule by fear. They thought the darkness was their ally. I typed back 4 words. Watch me turn it on. I grabbed the envelopes and placed a hand on my stomach. I felt a small kick, a reminder of what was at stake. We are not doing this for the money, I whispered to the life growing inside me. We are doing this for dignity. You will not grow up afraid of these people. I walked out the door, ready to burn their house of cards to the ground. The lobby of Halston Meridian was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make anyone walking through it feel insignificant. I arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning, flanked by Arthur Sterling and 2 junior associates. The head of security, a man I had brought coffee to last Christmas, stepped forward with his hand raised. Ms. Whitmore, I have strict orders, he said, avoiding my eyes. You are not cleared for entry. Mr. Halston has flagged you as a security risk. Arthur didn't even slow down. He thrust a heavy cream-colored envelope into the guard's chest. This is a court-certified notification of a material party's right to attend under the corporate bylaws. If you physically bar a legal stakeholder from a board meeting, you will be personally named in the lawsuit for obstruction of justice. Step aside. The guard looked at the letter, then at the elevators, and stepped back. We walked through the gates without breaking stride. When the double doors of the boardroom swung open, the conversation inside died instantly. 12 heads turned. Gordon Halston sat at the head of the table, looking like a king whose court had just been interrupted by a peasant. Ethan was sitting to his right, hunched over, looking pale and nauseous. Valerie Cross stood by a projection screen, laser pointer in hand. "Get her out of here," Gordon barked, standing up. "Security, sit down." "Gordon," I said, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the room. "My lawyers have already filed the necessary injunctions. If you remove me, this meeting is illegal, and every decision you make today becomes void." I took a seat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. Gordon slowly sat back down, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He decided to pivot. If he couldn't kick me out, he would destroy me in front of the audience. "Very well," Gordon said, smoothing his tie. "Let the minutes show that Harper Whitmore, the subject of our internal investigation, has forced her way in. This confirms exactly what I have been telling you. She is an intruder. She seduced my son to gain access codes and sell our proprietary data to competitors." Valerie clicked the remote. A photo appeared on the screen, a grainy shot of me meeting Arthur Sterling at a coffee shop 2 days ago. "This was taken 48 hours ago," Valerie announced, her voice dripping with professional concern. Harper was seen handing documents to a known corporate litigator often hired by our rivals. "We also have logs of her attempting to access the secure server, and we have a witness." She turned to Ethan. "Ethan, tell the board what you found." Ethan looked up, his eyes darting between me and his father. He looked like a trapped animal. I saw her with a burner phone," Ethan stammered. "She was hiding it. She has been acting strange for months," the board members murmured. "They were buying it. To them. I was just the treacherous wife, the leak in the hull. I sat perfectly still, letting them pile the accusations higher and higher. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves twice over. Is that all I asked after Valerie finished listing my supposed crimes? It is enough to ban you from the premises and sue you for damages," Gordon sneered. I turned to Arthur. "Mr. Sterling, please ensure the official recording is active. I want every word from this point forward to be preserved for the grand jury." Valerie stiffened. She liked threats made in shadows. "Not on the record." "If I am a spy," I asked, looking directly at Gordon, "and if I am only here to steal data, why does the non-disclosure agreement you tried to force me to sign explicitly forbid me from owning or voting on company stock?" The room went quiet. It was a logical inconsistency that even the sleepiest board member couldn't miss. Spies steal secrets. They don't need to be banned from shareholder rights. "That is standard language," Valerie said quickly. Too quickly. I turned my gaze to Ethan. "Ethan, you are under oath effectively right now. Tell the board the truth. What did your father promise you in exchange for getting me to sign that document? Was it capital for your failing project?" Ethan started, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is for the good of the company. I didn't want to." "Did you receive a transfer of $5 million into your division accounts this morning?" I pressed. Ethan went silent, his mouth opening and closing. The silence was louder than a confession. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They were beginning to smell the rot. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, thin document. I did not throw it. I slid it across the polished table with the precision of a blade. It stopped right in front of Gordon. You think I am here to steal from you, I said, my voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. You are mistaken. I am not a thief. Gordon looked down at the paper. The header read, Notice of Beneficial Ownership and Proxy Control. It listed the trust keys, the authorization codes, and the legal chain of custody. It did not list the $20 billion total, but it listed the rights. I am not here to take something from you. Gordon, I said as he read the first line, his face draining of all color. I am here because I already own it. The room fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Gordon looked up at me, and for the first time, the arrogance was gone. In its place was the terrifying realization that the rabbit he had been hunting was actually a wolf, and he had just locked himself in the cage with it. Gordon stared at the paper in front of him, his hands shaking slightly against the mahogany table. He looked like a man trying to read a map in a language he did not understand. I nodded to Arthur Sterling, who opened his briefcase and produced the original deed of the Whitmore Atlas estate. The heavy document thudded onto the table with the weight of absolute authority. The total valuation of the assets currently under Mrs. Halston's control is approximately $20 billion, Sterling announced, his voice slicing through the room. More importantly, the estate holds the controlling voting interest in the Gemini Trust, which, as you all know, owns 51% of Halston Meridian's parent debt. The board members gasped. It was not a polite sound. It was the sound of 12 wealthy people realizing their boss had picked a fight with their banker. I was not just a shareholder. I was the majority voice Gordon had spent his entire career trying to court, and he had just tried to blackmail me into silence. This is a lie, Valerie screeched, losing her composure entirely. She forged its security. I wouldn't do that. Valerie, I said calmly. I pressed a key on my laptop. The projector screen shifted from the photo of me to a stream of documents provided by Greymantle. Because while you were busy tracking my obstetrician appointments, you forgot to encrypt your own offshore transfers. The screen displayed the logs, Valerie's unauthorized access to employee personnel files, the surveillance payments, and finally, the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands firm used to bribe city officials. The board members recoiled from the screen as if it were radioactive. This establishes a pattern of corporate espionage and gross misconduct, I stated. But there is one last thing. I played the audio file. Ethan's voice filled the cavernous room, tinny but unmistakable. It was staged. Okay, Dad set it up to claim the insurance money to cover my debts. He hired the guy. Valerie kept the payment records to hold over us. Ethan put his head in his hands. Valerie went pale, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Gordon stood up so abruptly his chair tipped over. Security! Gordon roared, his face purple. Get this woman and her lawyers out of my building immediately. Sit down. Gordon, the company's general counsel said, standing up from the far end of the table. He looked terrified. We cannot remove her. She has just presented evidence of felony arson, insurance fraud, and blackmail involving the CEO and COO. If we touch her, we are accessories. The silence that followed was heavy and final. Gordon looked around the room, searching for an ally, but nobody would meet his eyes. He was alone. Here is how this ends, I said, sliding a prepared document toward the center of the table. Gordon, you will resign effective immediately for health reasons. Valerie, you are terminated for cause. Effective now. The company will self-report the accounting irregularities to the SEC to mitigate the damage. If you refuse, I release the full Greymantle dossier to the Department of Justice and the press within the hour. It took less than 5 minutes. The board voted unanimously. Gordon was stripped of his title. Valerie was escorted out by the very security guards she had tried to weaponize against me. An interim CEO was named, a quiet man with a clean record who looked at me with terrified respect. The room cleared, leaving only me, my lawyers, and Ethan. He sat frozen in his chair, a ruin of a man. I walked over to him and placed the divorce papers on the table. "Harper," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know. I swear, if I had known about the money, that is the problem." "Ethan," I said, my voice devoid of anger, "you only value things with a price tag. You abandoned me while I was pregnant to buy a future from your boss. Today, I am returning you to your true value. 0. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look back. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stepping out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the city. I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling a profound sense of peace. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a blocked number, likely Gordon's last gasp of venom. "Do you understand power?" Now I looked at the message and deleted it without replying. I didn't need to answer. I walked toward my car, ready to start a life where the only legacy that mattered was the one I would build for my child. I was the one who wrote the ending, and it was perfect. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.